Late November in Knox County, Tennessee. The air outside is crisp, but inside the house on Golden View Lane, the thermostat is cranked to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The suffocating stench of bleach, sewer gas, and melting plastic violently assaults the senses. In the kitchen, a large stainless steel stock pot sits on the stove. The burner is still warm. Inside that pot, simmering in a toxic chemical soup, is the severed head of a 55-year-old mother. This wasn't the work of a phantom serial killer. It was Thanksgiving weekend, and her son had just come home for the holidays. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy were the embodiment of the quiet American dream. After decades of relentless labor, the couple was finally staring down the barrel of a well-deserved retirement. Joel, a pipeline engineering designer, was known for his meticulous nature and sharp intellect. Lisa worked in accounts payable at a local engineering firm in Knoxville. She was the absolute heart of the family, a woman deeply devoted to her children from previous relationships and the one son she shared with Joel. By the fall of 2016, the couple had spent 31 years together. Their two-story brick home on Golden View Lane was a comfortable suburban anchor, but it was simply too much space for two empty nesters. They had recently purchased a secluded property 80 miles northeast in Surgeonsville. It was a quiet rural retreat where they planned to spend their twilight years off the grid, out of the corporate rat race, and focused entirely on each other. The Knoxville house was already on the market. Moving boxes were stacked in the living room and hallways. The transition to the next phase of their lives was in full swing. However, securing that retirement required a strict recalibration of their finances. For nearly a decade, Joel and Lisa had carried a massive, hidden burden, an ongoing financial hemorrhage that prevented them from truly moving forward. That drain was their 28-year-old son, Joel Michael Guy Jr., while his three older half-sisters had long since built independent, successful lives. Joel Jr. remained fully tethered to his parents' bank accounts. He resided over 500 miles away in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. To the outside world, he was an eternal academic. He had been taking college courses on and off for 9 consecutive years, ostensibly studying at Louisiana State University to become a plastic surgeon. In reality, he lacked any clear trajectory and hadn't held a steady job his entire adult life. His existence in Baton Rouge was an impenetrable bubble of extreme isolation. He lived in an apartment funded exclusively by his mother and father. They paid his rent, his tuition, his utilities, and deposited a generous monthly stipend for his living expenses. Joel Jr. rarely left his space. He had no documented friends, no romantic relationships, and maintained a fiercely guarded, solitary routine. Relatives described him as highly intelligent but unsettlingly detached. When he did visit Tennessee for the holidays, he was a phantom in his own home, socially awkward, preferring the confines of a guest bedroom to the warmth of family gatherings. He would often stare blankly during conversations, completely disengaged from the world around him. The contrast was stark. Joel Sr. and Lisa were outgoing, deeply embedded in their local community, and universally regarded as generous to a fault. Their son was an anomaly they constantly had to accommodate. But as the Surgeonsville move rapidly approached, the financial math simply no longer worked. Joel Sr. and Lisa sat down and made the most agonizing decision a parent can face. They were going to permanently sever the financial umbilical cord. They formulated a clear plan. They would inform Joel Jr. that they would no longer cover his rent, tuition, or daily expenses. Thanksgiving of 2016 was chosen as the absolute deadline. They arranged to bring him up from Louisiana, intending to host one final lavish holiday dinner in the Golden View Lane home. Once the plates were cleared, they would sit him down and deliver the ultimatum. It was meant to be a firm push toward adulthood, a necessary act of tough love designed to force their reclusive son to finally step into the real world. The financial tether wasn't just a convenience for the son living in Louisiana. It was the entire structural foundation of his reality. Without the steady, monthly deposits from his mother and father, his isolated existence would instantly disintegrate. For nearly a decade, he had fiercely shielded himself from the demands of society. hiding behind the impenetrable guise of a perpetual medical student. The prospect of securing a job, paying his own rent, or interacting with the harsh realities of the world outside his Baton Rouge apartment was not merely a frustrating inconvenience. To a mind as rigidly compartmentalized and detached as his, it was a catastrophic existential threat. The Baton Rouge apartment was a vacuum. There were no visitors, no ringing phones, no spontaneous social interactions, just the low hum of the air conditioner and the harsh glare of a computer screen. When the ultimatum began to crystallize in the weeks leading up to the holiday, something within that silent apartment fundamentally fractured. The parents genuinely believed they were offering a necessary push toward self-sufficiency. They had spent months agonizing over the decision. The mother's fierce protective instinct had constantly battled against the father's pragmatic realization that they would literally never be able to afford retirement if they kept writing checks. They openly discussed their tightened budget with their daughters, admitting that keeping their adult son afloat was draining their accounts dry. The Golden View Lane property was already sold. The rural retreat 80 miles away was waiting. The transition was absolute, and the financial spigot had to be turned off. But the son did not process this as tough love or parental guidance. He perceived it as a profound, unforgivable betrayal. If the financial lifeline was severed, the parents who provided it immediately outlived their usefulness. Worse, they possessed tangible assets. There were life insurance policies totaling $500,000. There would be proceeds from the imminent sale of the Knoxville property. A dark, terrifyingly clinical logic began to take root. If they were gone, the assets would automatically transfer to him as the next of kin. The financial support wouldn't just continue, it would become permanent, and he would never have to answer to them again. The psychological shift from dependent child to calculating predator was entirely methodical. It did not manifest in a sudden, explosive fit of rage. It was engineered meticulously over weeks. Before even packing a single piece of clothing for the holiday, the preparations commenced. He moved through the aisles of hardware stores and supermarkets in Louisiana with a sterile, focused objective. He acquired items that had absolutely no place in a Thanksgiving suitcase. Heavy-duty clear polyethylene tarps, gallons of concentrated acid, industrial drain cleaner, bleach, a sturdy hunting knife with a heavy, fixed blade. He felt the weight of the chemicals, the slosh of the caustic liquids inside their thick plastic jugs. He packed these supplies into the trunk of his vehicle, effectively creating a mobile arsenal of destruction, and began the long drive northeast to Tennessee. He arrived in Knox County on Wednesday, November 23rd. The atmosphere inside the home was already chaotic, filled with half-packed cardboard moving boxes, rolls of packing tape, and the general disarray of a family in heavy transition. His mother was overjoyed to see him, embracing him at the front door, completely oblivious to the lethal cargo sitting just yards away in the driveway. Thanksgiving Day brought a full house. The older half-sisters arrived to celebrate what was supposed to be a joyous, nostalgic milestone, the final holiday meal in the childhood home before the parents relocated for good. The dining room was loud, filled with the rich smells of roasted meat, the clinking of silverware against porcelain, and warm conversations about the future. Yet the guest of honor remained a ghost. He was physically present at the table, but psychologically, he was miles away. He barely engaged with his siblings. When spoken to directly, he offered brief, monotone responses, his eyes constantly darting away to focus on the wall, refusing to hold human contact. He spent the vast majority of the afternoon retreated in his upstairs guest bedroom, pacing the floorboards, isolating himself from the warmth radiating just one floor below. His sisters noted his bizarre, withdrawn behavior, chalking it up to his usual intense social awkwardness. They had grown accustomed to his eccentricities over the years. No one at that table could possibly fathom that he wasn't just being antisocial. He was quietly evaluating them, calculating timelines, and waiting for the witnesses to leave. The tension underneath the festive surface was heavy and palpable. The impending conversation about his financial cutoff hung in the air, unspoken but acutely felt by the parents. They had strategically planned to wait until the holiday festivities officially concluded before delivering the final verdict. They wanted to preserve the peace of the Thanksgiving dinner, unaware that their silence was only feeding his internal countdown. By Friday afternoon, the dynamic fundamentally shifted. The house began to empty out. The half-sisters hugged their father and mother goodbye in the driveway, wishing them a safe and happy weekend, and drove back to their respective lives. They would be the last family members to see the couple breathing. Now it was just the three of them. The residual noise of the holiday completely faded, replaced only by the quiet ticking of the living room clock and the dull rustle of cardboard boxes being shifted. The son remained upstairs behind a closed door. His parents went about their normal evening routine, mentally rehearsing the incredibly difficult financial conversation they intended to have the next morning. They were preparing to close one chapter of their lives and open another, entirely unaware that their son had already written the ending. Up in the second-floor bedroom, the luggage was unzipped. The heavy hunting knife was unsheathed from its casing. The thick plastic tarps were unrolled. The meticulous clinical plan that had been drafted in the total isolation of Baton Rouge was about to be executed. He was no longer viewing his mother and father as human beings with histories and heartbeats. They were simply obstacles. They were a financial transaction that needed to be forcibly, violently finalized. The house settled into a deep, quiet Friday night. The temperature outside began to drop below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Upstairs, he sat in the silence and simply waited for the optimal moment to strike. Saturday, November 26th. The looming financial cutoff conversation never happened. Joel Sr. and Lisa woke up, entirely unaware that their son's internal countdown had reached 0. The morning proceeded with the mundane rhythm of a typical holiday weekend. Around midday, Lisa grabbed her purse and car keys. She drove to a nearby Walmart to purchase groceries, perhaps picking up a few final provisions before her son's scheduled departure back to Louisiana. The heavy front door clicked shut, the deadbolt engaged. Joel Sr. was now alone in the house with the 28-year-old. Joel Sr. retreated to his upstairs exercise room. He stepped up to his workout equipment, settling into his daily physical routine. The house was dead quiet. Down the hall, the son unzipped his luggage. He retrieved a heavy-duty Bowen's hunting knife. The blade was thick, fixed, and razor-sharp. He walked silently down the carpeted hallway. There was no warning, no shouted argument, no hesitation. The ambush was immediate and devastating. The son lunged, driving the blade into his father's chest. But the 61-year-old pipeline engineer fought back, hard. The struggle was a chaotic, violently desperate collision of muscle and bone. They crashed into the exercise equipment. Blood splattered in a horrific, sweeping arc, coating the walls, soaking the workout gear, and staining the window blinds. The father fought for his life, grabbing frantically at the blade, trying to disarm the younger, heavier attacker. During the frantic grapple, the son's grip slipped on the blood-soaked handle. The razor-sharp edge sliced deep into his own hands, tearing through the flesh of his fingers. The pain was sharp. The adrenaline overrode it. He overpowered the older man. He delivered a relentless barrage of fatal strikes, piercing the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. Joel Sr. collapsed onto the carpet. The heavy thud shook the second-story floorboards. The violent thrashing ceased. The room fell entirely silent, save for the sound of heavy, ragged breathing. The son stood over the body. His hands were bleeding profusely, dripping dark crimson onto the floor. This was a critical, dangerous deviation from his meticulously written plan. His private journal had not accounted for a brutal, hand-to-hand fight to the death. But the machine could not stop. The psychological detachment held firm. He grabbed his father's lifeless form. He began the grueling process of dragging the massive 200-pound man out of the exercise room and down the hallway. The dull, heavy drag of dead weight across the carpet. Fibers echoed through the empty second floor. He hauled the body into the master bathroom, dropping it over the porcelain lip of the bathtub. Then, he waited. Hours bled by. The afternoon stretched on in absolute silence. Finally, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway signaled the shift in the timeline. Lisa was home. She opened the front door, carrying plastic Walmart shopping bags. She walked into the kitchen, setting the items on the counter. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She did not notice the faint, coppery scent of blood drifting down the stairwell. She did not hear the calculated, heavy footsteps descending the wooden stairs behind her. The son stalked through the hallway. The hunting knife remained firmly in his lacerated grip. He approached his mother from behind as she stood near the entryway. The strike was instantaneous. The sheer velocity and force of the attack knocked her violently to the ground. Groceries scattered across the linoleum. Cans rolled into the corners. She had no time to process the betrayal, no time to fight back. The assault was an overkill of pure mechanical precision. 9 ribs were fractured. Her spine was severed. The blade moved with terrifying speed until all movement ceased. Lisa lay lifeless on the floor of the home she had worked 3 decades to build. The house was now a tomb. The son moved to the windows, pulling the blinds tight. He locked the doors. The violent phase was complete. Now, the clinical erasure had to begin. He retrieved the supplies purchased in Baton Rouge, the industrial chemicals, the heavy-duty 45-gallon plastic Tupperware bins, the thick polyethylene tarps. He dragged his mother's body upstairs to join his father's. The sheer physical exertion required for this phase was immense, but he operated with chilling, robotic efficiency. He transformed the upstairs bathrooms into an abattoir. He systematically dismembered the bodies of the people who had funded his entire existence. Limbs were severed at the joints. Torsos were separated. The blade cut through cartilage and bone. He executed the steps exactly as he had outlined in his private notebook, a terrifying manual detailing the precise anatomy and the exact tools required to dismantle a human form. He placed the segmented torsos and limbs into the large plastic containers. Then, he uncapped the industrial jugs. He poured a highly corrosive, toxic cocktail over the remains, a mixture of liquid drain cleaner, bleach, hydrogen peroxide, and sewer line chemicals. The instant the acid made contact with biological tissue, a violent chemical reaction triggered. The liquid began to bubble and churn. The air in the bathroom instantly turned toxic. A suffocating miasma of synthetic cleaning agents and decaying flesh filled the second floor, burning the eyes and searing the throat. It was an overwhelming, noxious haze. The ultimate act of depravity was reserved for the kitchen. He carried his mother's severed head downstairs. He opened the cabinets and selected a large, heavy-bottomed stainless steel stockpot. He placed the head inside, submerged it in the corrosive liquid mixture, and set the pot on the stove. He turned the dial. The blue flame ignited. The concoction began to heat, eventually reaching a rolling simmer. The hiss of the boiling liquid echoed in the empty kitchen. It was a calculated, horrific strategy designed to dissolve the facial tissue and destroy any identifying dental records. He knew that chemical decomposition required extreme temperatures. The late November air outside was chilling the house, slowing the acidic reaction. He walked to the central thermostat in the hallway. He violently cranked the dial up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. To amplify the effect, he plugged in portable space heaters inside the bathrooms and aimed them directly at the Tupperware bins. The house began to bake. The ambient heat caused the acidic slurry to react exponentially faster. The temperature inside the plastic containers skyrocketed. The thick walls of the Tupperware began to warp, bulge, and slowly melt from the sheer thermal pressure generating inside. It was now Sunday morning. The house was a pressurized oven of biological decay and blinding chemical vapor. But the plan was fracturing. The deep lacerations on the son's hands, sustained during the initial ambush, were severe. The bleeding wouldn't stop. The pain was becoming entirely unmanageable. He could not finish the cleanup. He wrapped his hands tightly in bandages. He grabbed his backpack containing the notebook and walked out the front door. He locked the deadbolt, leaving the heat blasting and the stove burner ignited. He got into his car and merged onto the interstate, heading straight south to Baton Rouge to seek medical treatment at a student health clinic. He fully intended to return and finish dissolving the evidence. He drove away, leaving behind a suburban home that was rapidly transforming into an unimaginable hellscape. Monday, November 28th. The corporate offices at Jacobs Engineering hummed with the standard, sterile rhythm of a new week. Lisa was the payroll administrator. Her role required absolute precision, and her attendance record was immaculate. By 9 a.m., her desk remained entirely empty. Her supervisor immediately noted the absence. By 10 a.m., repeated calls to her mobile phone routed directly to an automated voicemail system. This was a severe deviation from her established baseline. Her boss did not wait for a second day of absence to raise the alarm. He contacted the Knox County Sheriff's Office, citing her uncharacteristic disappearance, and officially requested a welfare check at the Golden View Lane residence. Patrol units navigated the quiet, manicured streets, pulling into the driveway just after noon. The exterior of the two-story brick home presented a facade of absolute suburban normalcy, save for a few subtle, deeply unsettling details. Both family vehicles, a truck and a mid-sized SUV, were parked exactly where they belonged. The mailbox was stuffed with uncollected weekend deliveries. Officers approached the heavy front door and knocked with the weight of authority. Total silence. Through the thick wood, they could only hear the muffled, frantic barking of a dog, isolated somewhere in the upper levels of the structure. They tested the brass doorknob. It was locked tight. The deputies initiated a standard perimeter sweep. They moved along the exterior walls, checking the lower-level windows for signs of forced entry. Cupping their hands against the cold glass to cut the glare, they peered into the kitchen. The visual was jarring. The linoleum floor was a chaotic mess of discarded plastic shopping bags. Packaged sausages, raw bacon, and a shattered glass bottle of syrup were strewn across the ground in a haphazard, violent scatter. It looked less like a clumsy drop and more like the immediate aftermath of a sudden, brutal disruption. That visual evidence established immediate probable cause to enter the premises. The deputies bypassed the main entrance, eventually finding an unlocked access point near the garage. They pushed the secondary door open. The atmosphere inside did not just hit them, it physically assaulted them. A solid wall of 90-degree heat rolled out of the threshold. The air was incredibly dense, heavy with a thick chemical fog that instantly burned their sinuses and caused their eyes to water. It was a suffocating, lethal amalgamation of concentrated bleach, industrial drain cleaner, and a foul, underlying sweetness that experienced law enforcement officers recognize instantly. The unmistakable scent of rapid biological decay. Gagging on the fumes, the deputies drew their sidearms and stepped into the suffocating thermal trap. The ambient heat was oppressive. Every single surface in the home felt coated in a thin, toxic film of vaporized chemicals. They cleared the lower level with slow, methodical steps. Moving past the scattered groceries, they observed dark, smeared stains across the flooring. But the most alarming element in the kitchen was the stovetop. All 4 dials were turned to the off position, but a massive, heavy-gauge stainless steel stockpot sat squarely on the back burner. The metal was still radiating intense heat from the recently extinguished flame. The lid was secured. The chemical odor was overwhelmingly concentrated right there. The officers documented the scene without disturbing the vessel, their rigorous training overriding the visceral human instinct to uncover it. They had absolutely no idea that mere inches from their gloved hands, submerged in a corrosive liquid slurry, rested the matriarch of the household. The sheer psychological weight of the environment pressed down on them. They moved cautiously toward the central stairwell, their flashlights illuminating heavy, wide drag marks etched deeply into the carpet fibers. The temperature climbed even higher as they ascended to the second floor. The dog's barking grew frantic, echoing from behind a closed guest room door. The hallway carpet was soaked with deep, rust-colored stains. The officers breached the upstairs exercise room. The walls were abstract canvases of arterial spray. Expensive workout equipment was overturned and shattered. It was the undeniable epicenter of a massive kinetic struggle to the death. Following the primary blood trail down the corridor, the deputies reached the master bathroom. The door was ajar. Inside, the heat reached its zenith. 2 portable electric space heaters were running at maximum capacity, aimed directly at the center of the tiled floor. Resting under the harsh thermal glare were 2 45-gallon plastic storage bins. The thick polyethylene walls were actively warping, buckling, and melting from the extreme thermal and chemical pressure generating inside. A highly corrosive liquid bubbled aggressively within the sealed containers. Resting on the floor near the base of the bins, completely detached from their host, were a pair of human hands. The deputies immediately backed out. They did not attempt to open the melting bins. They did not return to the kitchen to lift the stockpot lid. The scale of the atrocity vastly exceeded standard patrol protocols. They retreated to the front lawn, violently gasping for cold, fresh air, and radioed for a specialized hazmat unit and the Major Crimes Division. Within an hour, Golden View Lane was flooded with emergency vehicles, heavy armored trucks, and layers of yellow crime scene tape. The neighborhood woke up from its post-holiday lethargy to an absolute nightmare. Local residents stood on their manicured lawns in shock, watching men clad in heavy, encapsulated chemical suits entering the quiet brick house. Rumors ignited instantly. The community, accustomed to minor property damage and traffic citations, was paralyzed by the realization that an act of cartel-level butchery had occurred right next door. The social echo was immediate, a collective terrified whisper regarding what could possibly require a full-scale hazardous materials response in a quiet retirement home. The Knox County Regional Forensic Center had never deployed for a residential call of this magnitude. When specialized hazardous materials teams finally breached the Golden View Lane property, they did not enter a standard crime scene. They entered an active, highly volatile chemical environment. Clad in heavy encapsulated Level A protective suits with self-contained breathing apparatuses, the technicians had to physically vent the structure before standard homicide investigators could even step through the front door. The ambient heat had baked the toxic vapor deep into the drywall, the carpets, and the ceiling tiles. Industrial fans were positioned at the entryways, pushing the lethal miasma of vaporized acid and decomposing tissue out into the cold November air. Only then could the grim work of processing the interior begin. The primary objective was neutralizing the ongoing destruction of forensic evidence. The heavy-duty plastic bins in the master bathroom were structurally failing, the synthetic walls weeping and bubbling under the intense thermal and chemical load. Hazmat technicians utilized specialized chemical-resistant pumps to carefully siphon the corrosive slurry away from the human remains trapped inside. Downstairs, the stainless steel stockpot on the kitchen stove was documented, photographed, and carefully removed from the burner. Seasoned forensic pathologists, men and women who had spent decades cataloging fatal accidents, gang violence, and extreme trauma, were forced to step outside the perimeter multiple times to physically collect themselves. The sheer mechanical degradation of the human form was completely alien to the quiet, affluent suburb. The immediate investigative hurdle was establishing a viable motive. The staggering savagery of the dismemberment strongly suggested a message killing, the kind of extreme theatrical violence typically associated with organized crime syndicates or targeted cartel hits. Detectives scoured the perimeter for signs of forced entry, broken deadbolts, or shattered window glass. They found nothing. The doors had been locked from the inside. Furthermore, the victim's youngest child was completely unaccounted for. His vehicle was missing from the driveway. His phone was inactive. For a brief, frantic period, a working theory emerged that an external hit squad had ambushed the home, slaughtered the parents, and abducted the son as a hostage. The neighborhood was paralyzed by this narrative. Rumors spread like wildfire across local social media networks, generating a palpable atmosphere of terror among the residents. Doors were deadbolted, security systems were armed. The idea that a professional kill team was operating in their quiet streets fundamentally shattered the community's illusion of safety. That cartel theory disintegrated the moment crime scene technicians began processing the second-floor guest bedroom. The space was mostly empty, save for a few discarded items and an abandoned backpack resting near the bed. Inside that canvas bag, investigators discovered a simple, spiral-bound collegiate notebook. It did not contain academic notes or medical school study guides. It was a comprehensive, step-by-step operational blueprint for mass murder. Detectives opened the notebook to find pages of highly organized, bulleted lists written in neat, deliberate handwriting. The entries detailed a terrifyingly clinical agenda. The writer had outlined the exact supplies needed, specifically noting the requirement to purchase heavy carving knives and a sledgehammer to systematically crush bones. The notebook contained precise, methodical instructions on how to flood the house with specific chemicals to destroy forensic evidence. There were explicit reminders to flush smaller biological fragments down the toilets to clear the drains, and a direct command to turn the home's thermostat up to 90 degrees to artificially accelerate the chemical decomposition. Most damning of all, the pages included detailed financial calculations. The author had meticulously tallied the exact value of the parents' life insurance policies, their retirement savings accounts, and the projected equity from the imminent sale of the Golden View house. The assets belonged to the victims. The handwriting belonged to their missing son. The paradigm of the entire investigation shifted in an instant. The son was not a hostage. He was not a secondary victim. He was the apex predator. The notebook proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the extreme violence was not a crime of passion or a sudden psychotic break. It was a cold, deeply premeditated financial transaction. The suspect had simply miscalculated the sheer physical endurance required to dismantle 2 adult bodies alongside the structural integrity of plastic storage bins. The deep lacerations sustained during the desperate defensive struggle with his father had forced him to abandon the cleanup and flee the state. Knox County authorities immediately pivoted from a rescue operation to a multi-state manhunt. Arrest warrants for 2 counts of first-degree murder were expedited. Detectives contacted the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, transmitting the suspect's vehicle information, license plate, and his last known residential address. By Monday evening, a covert surveillance net was draped over the apartment complex in Louisiana. Plainclothes federal agents and tactical units monitored the perimeter, watching the suspect's vehicle sitting quietly in the parking lot. They waited through the night, maintaining absolute radio silence. The resolution arrived on Tuesday morning, November 29th. The suspect exited his Baton Rouge apartment, walking methodically toward his car. He was not rushing. He did not check his blind spots or look over his shoulder. He moved with the exact same detached, robotic lethargy that had defined his entire adult life. Tactical teams converged from multiple blind angles, flooding the parking lot and boxing in his vehicle. As armed agents surrounded him, demanding his immediate compliance, he offered absolutely no resistance. He did not ask why he was being detained. He did not feign ignorance or ask about the safety of his family back in Tennessee. He simply raised his arms to surrender. The arresting officers immediately noted that both of his hands were heavily wrapped in thick, white medical bandages. His face remained a completely blank, emotionless mask, devoid of fear, surprise, or remorse. The architect of the Golden View Lane nightmare had been secured. September 2020. The Knox County courtroom was utterly silent as the prosecution meticulously unveiled the contents of the notebook. The jury was forced to view the unredacted crime scene photographs, the melted bins, the corrosive damage, the sheer mechanical butchery. Through it all, the defendant sat at the table like a marble statue. He exhibited absolutely no physical reaction. There were no tears, no lowered head in shame, no sudden outbursts of denial. Even as forensic pathologists detailed the exact methodology used to dismantle the people who had given him life, his expression remained entirely vacant. He occasionally scribbled notes on a legal pad, completely detached from the gravity of the proceedings. The defense had virtually nothing to work with. The physical evidence was insurmountable, and the financial motive was explicitly documented in his own handwriting. It took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a consensus. The verdict was unanimous. He was found guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. The presiding judge handed down the absolute maximum penalty allowable: 2 consecutive life sentences. The financial transaction he had so methodically planned resulted in a permanent, concrete cage. The tragedy of the Golden View Lane murders lies in the profound, twisted paradox of the motive. Joel and Lisa did not perish because they were neglectful, abusive, or absent. They were slaughtered entirely because they cared too much. Their final mistake was an act of deep parental love, a desperate attempt to finally push a dependent child toward a self-sufficient life. In return, they raised their own executioner, a man whose only response to independence was total annihilation. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.